of my favorite things to do was to go outside. Didn't matter what I was doing, I just loved to be outside in the summer. It was always warm, and we had this nice big hill, or at least a hill that I thought was nice until I got old enough to mow it. And I just loved being outside. And my sister did too, which was great, because that meant I had somebody to go out and play with me. And one year, when we were both getting close to teenagers, my sister wanted to plant a garden. And so my parents thought about it, and finally they said, okay. And so they marked off a part of our backyard, which at the time was fine for me, because that meant that much less yard for me to mow. And I was okay with this, and I was kind of excited. And then Dad handed me a shovel. I was a little less excited. And even though I spent all this time outside as a kid, I really didn't understand the impact I had on the environment until really I got to college, when I became more open-minded, and when I began to really actually start to consider things like climate change. And then in seminary, it all changed for me when I took a course called Ecological Spirituality. Now, all of that is to say that it was a course on how nature and our faith work together. And that's when I really started to understand our impact on the environment, and the ugly truth that at times comes with that. In our gospel lesson, Jesus is also sharing a not-so-pretty truth. When we encounter Jesus, he's telling all those present that the Son of Man is to be glorified. And then he goes into this analogy of a plant. He tells those listening that in order for a seed to do anything of productivity, first it needs to be buried, and it appears as though it dies in the process. But when that seed's given time, it grows, and it changes in appearance so radically that it seems to be a completely different thing. And Jesus is using this to talk about the way that he will die, and then he will return in a more glorified state. And Jesus, in doing all of this, he's inviting those hearing into a dialogue with him by presenting this first statement of it's time for the Son to be glorified, and then moving into this analogy of the plant. He's stating something without actually stating something directly. And we see that this is a dialogue that is not exclusive. It's not just for the disciples. It's not just for the Jewish people present. But John tells us that there were also some Greeks that wanted to speak to Jesus, and then it moves right on into this dialogue. And so this is a dialogue that's inclusive. And it's a dialogue about growth. You see, Jesus is speaking about the way that the faith, this movement that he started, the movement of love, is going to grow. And it's going to start. It starts with him. He is that first seed. And he's trying to invite others, not just the Jewish people, but the Greeks, the Samaritans, who the Jewish people didn't like. He's inviting everybody into this discussion. Because when we come to faith, it's not just so black and white, yes and no. There's lots of gray areas. And that's where dialogue comes into play. Through these gray areas, we can enter into discussion. We can wrestle together on the topics. We can begin to work together. But this is something that we as Americans sometimes struggle with. In our government, we have a bipartisan system. We have two sides, and as of late, there's been an aisle between them. And it seems to me that, especially after this last election, the aisle gets wider and wider every day. And it's not just climate change that the aisle widens on. Everything. It widens on one way or another. And in part, what my class is asking me to do is what Jesus asks us to do as well. He's asking us to step away from one side or the other, to set our biases aside, and to come into the quote-unquote purple zone. He's asking us to come to the middle, to enter into a dialogue. And not just a dialogue where one side shouts their point and then the other side shouts their point, but into a dialogue where we truly listen to the other person. And this dialogue can be difficult, as I said, because it's very easy to want to jump from what they said to a defensive stance because it goes against what you say. But Jesus is inviting us into a place, a safe place, that is the term that a lot of colleges are using nowadays, in which we can engage with each other in a way where there's no judgment, where there's supposed to be no bias. And it's a place where we just listen, where we don't take defensively one side or the other. And I got to experience a little bit of this in my own college time. You see, I was a Lutheran going to a Nazarene college. So theologically, there's a little bit of headbutting there. And it really wasn't until my classmates set aside the Nazarene or non-denominational background that they had, and I set down my Lutheran bias, that we really could dialogue without arguing about this or that. And Jesus is giving us this model. He's showing us how we can do this. Now, granted, this is within the framework of his time, but it can still be moved to our time because we have a lot to talk about. With climate change, we might want to avoid that. I mean, you talk about the earth heating up, I'll tell you about the 80-some inches of snow we had this past winter. And we can talk about, is it really warming up? But avoidance isn't always just that simple of, oh, you say this, well, I can say this, and it cancels each other out. Avoidance and adherence to dialogue can also be rooted in a desire to not claim our part of it. You see, in the truth, when we look at the truth, there's going to be times when it's ugly, and it's ugly because it shows us where we're wrong. It'll show us where we thought we were doing well, but in truth, we're not. And it will show us that sometimes these things that we think are bad, that are going wrong, we may have a part to play in it. For generations, we have done things specific ways, and we're now seeing the results of how that all played out. We're starting to see our climate change. It gets a little warmer even if we don't notice it all at once. Greenhouse gases get trapped in the atmosphere. It's warming up a little each day. And true, we do things to try and counteract this. We recycle. We try to be a little bit greener. We turn lights off when we're not in the room. But just doing simple practices like that might not be enough. We may need to go a little further. And tomorrow there's going to be a chance for that dialogue. There'll be a chance after service tomorrow to meet together in the gallery, and we will discuss. At the door, we'll leave our biases, our opinions, and we'll discuss what is happening. And we will be able to hear each other, because we will take the example that Jesus has led us to work with the truth that is presented to us, whether we want to face it or not. And we will be able to more fully engage in this issue. It wasn't until college, after longer than should have, that I was able to engage myself with the environment, with why I felt this connectedness to it, why I felt a love for being outside and running barefoot in the grass or running in the creek. And it wasn't until seminary that I understood the spiritual aspect of that. And it isn't until after the cross that the disciples and those listening really start to get what Jesus is saying. Because there's a moment, a defining moment that changes everything. For me, it was college and the friends I had and my decision to be more open-minded. For the disciples, as we'll hear about over the next couple of weeks, it's this whole 24 hours, where they go from sitting down to celebrate to hiding and mourning the death of Jesus. There's always one moment that changes everything. It's the moment that the seed is planted. And when we enter in a dialogue, as Jesus has shown us, that's when the seeds can begin to grow. That's when we're starting to do the work to help them grow. The seeds can become that plant. And then from the plant becomes more seeds. We can spread. We can begin to grow as a community. And when we look at the truth, whether it be on climate change or in our faith or on whatever, and we begin to dialogue together, we, like seeds, can grow and change into something new, serving a God who is glorified through the ugliness. Amen.